Yes, this is actually happening. We leave one conflict and then we end up in another conflict. Why am I not surprised? Biden approves plan to redeploy several hundred ground forces into Somalia. Here we go again. The president also signed off on targeting about a dozen Shabab leaders in the war-torn country, from which Donald Trump largely withdrew in his final weeks of office. So here we have Joe Biden stirring up a conflict that, for the most part, the U.S., we were no longer involved in. He's bringing it back to the table. They're all warmongers, you guys. It doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat. This is what they do. Let's go back into the article. Here we go. And you can see the picture here. It just looks really sad. Like, look at this picture. Who would want to live through this? So it says a Somali soldier patrolling near the presidential palace after a car bombing in Mogadishu, the capital, in September. Now, that was back in September. The Biden administration's goal in Somalia is to try to reduce the threat from Shabab terrorists. So here we go again, intervening in another country's conflict. President Biden has signed an order authorizing the military to once again deploy hundreds of special operation forces inside Somalia, largely reversing the decision by Donald Trump to withdraw nearly all 700 ground troops who had been stationed there, according to 4 officials familiar with the matter. In addition, Mr. Biden has approved a Pentagon request for standing authority to target about a dozen suspected leaders of al-Shabaab, the Somali terrorist group that is affiliated with al-Qaeda, 3 of the officials have said. Since Mr. Biden took office, airstrikes have largely been limited to those meant to defend partner forces facing an immediate threat. And I'm willing to bet some of those airstrikes also affected civilians that have absolutely nothing to do with this matter. This is the thing about war. Innocent people are killed. This is terrible. This is terrible. And I'm really interested to hear Ilhan Omar's position on this, because this is her home country. Now, if you've been with me for a long time, you'll know that last year I started discussing, when they first started doing the airstrikes, I was talking about it last year. At that point in time, Ilhan Omar had wrote a letter to Joe Biden asking him to stop this. She wrote a strongly worded letter. Why write a letter when you can have direct access? This is something I feel that Ilhan Omar should be talking about publicly, whether it's on CNN, MSNBC, wherever she needs to go to voice her opinion about this. Not Twitter and not a strongly worded letter. Now, she's not going to do that, though, because she wants to be on his good side. So this whole idea of writing a letter as if it's actually going to do something, they know it's not going to do anything. They're well aware of that. Here we go. Together, the decisions by Mr. Biden, described by the officials on the condition of anonymity, will revive an open-ended American counterterrorism operation that has amounted to a slow burn war through 3 administrations. The move stands in contrast to his decision last year to pull American forces from Afghanistan, saying that it is time to end the forever war. So, this is another example of him lying to the American people. This does not make any sense. You pulled troops out of Afghanistan only to send more troops abroad for another conflict after they had already pulled troops out of Somalia. This doesn't make any sense, people. And so for the people applauding Joe Biden, saying good job for pulling troops out of Afghanistan, where do those people stand right now that he's sending more troops into another country? Where are they now? There's a video clip. I don't know if I can play it on here, and I don't know if I still have it. But there was a video clip of Julian Assange explaining what these wars are really about. And he says in this clip that the goal is not necessarily to win. The goal is to have a forever war. That's the goal. Keep that in mind. Mr. Biden signed off on the proposal by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin III in early May. In a statement, Adrienne Watson, the National Security Council spokeswoman, acknowledged the move, saying it would enable a more effective fight against al-Shabaab. The decision to reintroduce a persistent presence was made to maximize the safety and effectiveness of our forces and enable them to provide more efficient support for our partners. So let's hear this again. The decision to reintroduce a persistent presence. You guys see this? Pay attention to this word, persistent. A persistent presence was made to maximize the safety and effectiveness of our forces and enable them to provide more efficient support for our partners. Ms. Watson did not indicate the number of troops the military would deploy. Of course not. But two people familiar with the matter said the figure would be capped at around 450. Let's all remember this. I'm going to follow this conflict closely because I want to see if they're going to stick to that number. That will replace a system in which U.S. troops training and advising Somali and African Union forces have made short stays since Mr. Trump issued what Ms. Watson described as a presumptuous decision to withdraw. The Biden administration strategy in Somalia is to try to reduce the threat from al-Shabaab by suppressing its ability to plot and carry out complicated operations. To that, I say, what complicated operations? What is it? Tell us. I think we have a right to know. A senior administration official has said this. Those include a deadly attack on an American airbase at Manda Bay, Kenya in January 2020. Now, I do remember that happening in January 2020. I think I talked about that story as well. In particular, the official said targeting a small leadership cadre, especially people who are suspected of playing roles in developing plots outside Somalia's borders or having special skills, is aimed at curtailing the threat to a level that is tolerable. Define tolerable. Tolerable for who? Tolerable for the people in Somalia or tolerable for the United States government? Who is it tolerable for? Here we go. Asked to square the return to heavier engagement in Somalia with the American withdrawal from Afghanistan last year, following through on a deal Mr. Trump had made with the Taliban. The senior administration official argued that the two countries presented significantly different complexities. For one, the official said the Taliban have not expressed an intention of attacking the United States. I'm going to say this one more time. The Taliban have not expressed an intention of attacking the United States. And other militant groups in Afghanistan do not control significant enclaves of territory from which to operate and plan. Given that al-Shabaab appears to pose a more significant threat, the administration concluded that more direct engagement in Somalia made sense. Okay. The strategy would focus on disrupting a few Shabaab leaders who are deemed a direct peril to us and our interests and our allies, and maintaining very carefully cabined presence on the ground to be able to work with our partners. Now, I'm not going to read this entire article. You can feel free to read the rest of this yourself. But long story short, here we go again. There always has to be some type of conflict that we are involved in. I'm just getting really sick of it. I'm so sick of it. This means, again, more innocent people will be killed. But again, what is the actual goal? Eric, I'll go ahead and take that video if you have it. I want you to hear what he says.
Subjugate Afghanistan. Because the goal is not to completely subjugate Afghanistan. The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite. That is the goal, i.e. the goal is to have an endless war, not a successful war.
You hear that? Endless, not successful. Let's hear that one more time. Here we go.
Because the goal is not to completely subjugate Afghanistan. The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite. That is the goal, i.e. the goal is to have an endless war, not a successful war.
The goal is to have an endless war, not a successful one. This is why we will stay in countries for years and not really win anything. They're not trying to win. This is another excuse to increase the budget for the military-industrial complex. Another excuse they can point to. Well, we need to have that large budget because we need to help. We need to, intervene in Somalia. You just pulled us out of one disaster. By the way, the war in Afghanistan was a complete failure. You pour us out of one just to put us into another one. Now, I do want to tell you something else about Somalia that I think is important. Now, every time I talk about these conflicts, I do want you to know that usually there are resources that are involved. They don't always tell us that. Especially mainstream media, they don't always mention to us, oh, by the way, there was opium in Afghanistan. They don't want to talk about that. They want you to believe the narrative that we are there to protect the women and the children. That's a big one, by the way. And to that, I say, if we're protecting the women and the children, then why are you killing innocent women and children? Let me show you something about Somalia. Let's look at their resources. I think this is interesting. What are the major natural resources of Somalia? A lot of times people like to call these countries third world countries. A lot of these countries are rich in resources. So here we go. Somalia is a country in the Horn of Africa that borders Djibouti. I hope I said that correctly. Ethiopia, Indian Ocean, the Gardafu Channel, and the Gulf of Eden. It has a total area approximately 256,201 square miles, making it the 42nd largest country in the world. Somalia has the longest coastland on Africa's mainland. The country is divided into 18 regions, which are further subdivided into several districts. The population of Somalia is approximately 14 million people. Somalia, one of the least developed countries in the world. Now, see, here we go with this term again, least developed countries. But I'm about to show you the resources that this country has. Here we go. Somalia is reported to hold large untapped reserves of numerous natural resources such as iron ore, uranium, copper, tin, bauxite, gypsum, salt, and natural gas. Its proximity to countries such as Yemen and Saudi Arabia makes it a potential reserve of oil. What do you know? Who would have thought? Not oil, you say? Yes, oil. Let's go back in. There's more. These resources remain largely untapped and unexploited because of the poor infrastructure and the decades of civil war. For a long time, the country did not have a substantial government in place. However, following the end of the Civil War, the country is slowly rebuilding, with several foreign companies already showing interest in investing in its mining industry. Well, would you look at that? What do you know? Here are some of the major resources of Somalia. Let's look at oil. Somalia's proximity to the Gulf of Arab states such as Yemen and Saudi Arabia makes it a huge potential for oil reserve. However, oil has not been exploited in the country, though certain foreign companies such as Chinese Oil Company have been granted a license to find minerals, including oil. The government of Somalia has also created the Somalia Petroleum Company to supervise and control petroleum exploration in the country. Range Resource, an oil group based in Sydney, estimates that the Puntland province in the north of Somalia has the potential to produce 5 to 10 million barrels of oil. Oil exploration in the region began in the 2000s with a series of negotiations between the government and foreign companies. In 2012, the government okayed the first official oil exploration in Puntland. Now, again, that's 2012. The exploration was led by Africa Oil, a Canadian oil company, and Range Resources. The Shebel 1 well became the first to yield oil. And then it goes on to mention all of the other resources as well. But the one I want you to focus on is oil, because that is a resource that the United States government cares very much so about. Look at a lot of our conflicts. I can tell you, when my dad was sent to Kuwait, this was during the Gulf War operation. They didn't really call it a war, but it was the Gulf War operation. When my dad was sent there, what was that about? Oil. This is another reason why I really want us to get off of some of these resources. Oil is one of them. That's what people want, more oil, especially the United States government. So I wanted to mention that to you because, again, I think when we talk about these conflicts in other countries, I think it's important to explain to people what resources are there. I don't want people to think that we're just going there to be the good guys and protect the women and the children. There's usually something in it for us, and they don't always tell us that part. Lawrence said another nation put their country on top of our resources. Thank you for the super chat, Carl. We are in Orwell's 1984, where the endless wars keep the ruling class in power while the lower classes remain powerless. Plus, we need to use our bombs. I hear you, Carl. I hear you. It's crazy, right?